GDP would be just over 6% lower, equivalent to £9 billion or £1,600 for every single one of us in Scotland. Real disposable income would be over 7% lower and business investment lower by almost 8%. And staying in the single market compared to full EU membership would reduce GDP by 2.7%. That's equivalent to £4 billion or just under £700 per head of population. Under this option, real disposable income would be 1.4% lower and business investment lower by just under 3% than if we were to stay in the EU. So it's clear from these figures that staying in the single market does not insulate us from the costs of leaving the EU, but it will minimise those costs. Indeed, compared to a hard Brexit, staying in the single market will benefit us to the tune of £1,600 per head, £1,600 for every person in Scotland. Now, much of the Brexit debate so far has understandably focused on the prospects for trade. But within Scotland, we know that it is our need to grow our population and improve productivity that are most often cited in our current economic debates. Indeed, these factors featured prominently in the Scottish Fiscal Commission's recent growth forecasts published alongside our draft budget. So it is striking that when you read the detail of the analysis we publish today, that it shows that the economic hit we will take comes not just from a loss in trade, but actually more so, especially in the longer term, from losses in productivity and population, the very things we need to improve on if we are to boost growth, jobs and living standards. So the evidence we present today is clear. The best way to minimise the economic damage of Brexit is to stay inside the single market. It's also, in my view, the best way to safeguard workers' rights and the social, consumer and environmental protections that we have come to take for granted. Of course, so far I've talked about the benefits of staying in the single market as it is just now, but the single market is not yet complete. The paper also sets out the future opportunities of continued membership for services, energy and the digital economy in particular. It seems inconceivable that while 30 countries of the European Economic Area, those still argument, I mean. That is equivalent to £12.7 billion or £2,300 for every person in Scotland. Under this option, real disposable income would also be 9.6% lower and business investment 10.2% lower. Under the option of a free trade agreement, GDP would be just over 6% lower, equivalent to £9 billion or £1,600 for every single one of us in Scotland. Real disposable income would be over 7% lower and business investment lower by almost 8%. And staying in the single market compared to full EU membership would reduce GDP by 2.7%. That's equivalent to £4 billion or just under £700 per head of population. Under this option, real disposable income would be 1.4% lower and business investment lower by just under 3% than if we were to stay in the EU. So it's clear from these figures that staying in the single market does not insulate us from the costs of leaving the EU, but it will minimise those costs. Indeed, compared to a hard Brexit, staying in the single market will benefit us to the tune of £1,600 per head, £1,600 for every person in Scotland. Now, much of the Brexit debate so far has understandably focused on the prospects for trade. But within Scotland, we know that it is our need to grow our population and improve productivity that are most often cited in our current economic debates. Indeed, these factors featured prominently in the Scottish Fiscal Commission's recent growth forecasts published alongside our draft budget. So it is striking that when you read the detail of the analysis we publish today, that it shows that the economic hit we will take comes not just from a loss in trade, but actually more so, especially in the longer term, from losses in productivity and population, the very things we need to improve on if we are to boost growth, jobs and living standards. So the evidence we present today is clear. The best way to minimise the economic damage of Brexit is to stay inside the single market. It's also, in my view, the best way to safeguard workers' rights and the social, consumer and environmental protections that we have come to take for granted. Of course, so far I've talked about the benefits of staying in the single market as it is just now, but the single market is not yet complete. The paper also sets out the future opportunities of continued membership for services, energy and the digital economy in particular. It seems inconceivable that while 30 countries of the European Economic Area, those still to join, will enjoy the benefits of that growth while we will be left outside. Indeed, that is particularly frustrating a prospect because Scotland is very well placed to take advantage of the developing and deepening single market. Our world-class universities, our potential in renewable energy, life sciences, our digital sector and other key areas of the Scottish economy are all in prime position to reap the rewards of these developments. And that would mean more jobs and higher wages. So it would be a tragedy for future generations if we were to let that opportunity pass us by. In services, for example, where both Scotland and the UK as a whole have a comparative advantage, the long-term potential gain from completing the single market is estimated to be of the order of 2.4% of EU GDP. A boost of national income of that size in Scotland would be equivalent to £3.6 billion or almost £700 per person. Enhancements to the digital single market could mean a further increase in EU GDP of nearly 2%. And for Scotland, that would be equivalent to almost £3 billion or over £500 per person. So this...
Well, Scotland's First Minister there, NICOLA STURGEON, speaking live, saying that Scotland and Scots would be better off if, after Brexit, the UK remains in the single market. Well, here to talk about that, I'm joined by two MPs. They are the Conservative Kwasi Kwarteng and Labour's Stephen Kinnock. Welcome to you both. Well, what do you think of that argument? I mean, she's got statistics there. She says staying in the single market be worth about £1,600.
There's nothing that she said on the screen that I haven't heard 18 months ago. We had a huge debate. We had 4 months ahead of the referendum when all the politicians, yourselves, the journalists, were talking about Brexit. We had the Treasury forecast, we had the George Osborne so-called punishment budget, we had all of that. And the country decided 52-48 to leave the EU. Nothing that she said just now in any way adds anything new to that debate. And in fact, I think it's incredibly negative. I think she can't look forward. And actually, if you look at her results last year in the general election, her party performed worse than any other party in the UK. So I think she's got her own issues to look to. And
still got more MPs in Scotland than anybody else.
Well, she lost 21 MPs. She lost more than a third of their MPs, which was a disaster compared to any other party.
There's no question that we're leaving the EU. It's not about whether or not we leave, it's about how we leave. We had a relatively narrow referendum result and followed up by a general election. I think the mandate from both of those is for the softest possible Brexit, a Brexit that doesn't wreck the British economy. And it's perfectly possible to move into the European Economic Area and the European free trade area in a way that does a lot to take back control.
You agree with Nicola that the UK ought to stay in the single market and the currency union?
I've been saying for over a year that we should move into the European Economic Area. One thing I think is actually important, it might seem a bit nuanced, but the European Economic Area is not the same as full membership of the single market. The most important difference being Articles 112 and 113 of the EEA agreement, which enable a country to unilaterally pull the emergency brake on free movement of labour and to set up a new system in its place. And I think the EEA is a really important distinction from the single market. I'm very much hoping that the leadership of both of the main parties in Parliament will come to understand that very important difference And I think it's a really good way forward for our country to reunite our deeply divided
Well, look,
country.
I don't know what Stephen's motivations are. I mean, clearly there's a group of people in his party, other parties,
you probably
who
both want the best for the country.
Of course we do, but a lot of people want to stay in the EU. They genuinely believe that leaving the EU was a disaster for this country. Now, I listened to those people in 2016. They said we would lose 500,000 jobs. They said there would be an immediate recession in 2016. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. To be fair to George Osborne and his team, there was an emergency budget. That budget was for 2016. It wasn't for when we left. There was an immediate impact assessment, which was completely wrong. Which was forgive me. I mean, I didn't realise you were on his side.
No, I'm not on his side.
But what I want to say is that we're going to leave, as you say, and I think that what Brexiteers want, what people want, is to have sovereignty over freedom of movement. We want to get our money back. We want to control the money, and it's very likely that we will do that. And we also want to control our laws. Now, any situation in which the ECJ has jurisdiction over and above our parliamentary sovereignty is something which will be resisted. Now, we don't know what the terms of the deal will be, and I know that Stephen's motives are good, but there are some people who want to drag us back by hook or crook into the EU, and that isn't an option.
I know it's not the outcome that you desire, but in your view, would being in the European Economic Area be compatible with leaving the EU?
I don't see how it is, because you've got jurisdiction of the ECJ. You are essentially a rule taker.
It's the EFTA. Can I just one point of clarification? I'll let you finish then. Sorry. The jurisdiction of the EEA, the court that has jurisdiction, is the EFTA Arbitration Court. They do take some of their steer from the European Court of Justice, but there's actually significant divergence between the EFTA Arbitration Court and the ECJ. So there's some really important distinctions between full EU membership and membership of the EEA.
But what I would say about this is that I think you're looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope, if you like. Your base assumption is that the EU membership is ideal, and somehow if we're not in the EU, we've got to try and replicate that as closely as possible. I reject that. I think there are many more opportunities in the global economy. I think I look at Europe, and even though the stock market is doing well there at the moment, this is not the engine of global growth. But there are markets all over the world which we can engage with, and I fear that the proposal that you suggest will actually restrict our ability to do deals outside the EU.
No, because membership of EFTA also enables you to do bilateral trade deals with third countries. Iceland has a bilateral trade deal with China. So it actually gives you a lot more flexibility. I've always believed that the one-size-fits-all approach of the EU has not been the right one.
Your problem, though, is that, as I understand it, your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is quite explicit. He said Britain is leaving the EU, and leaving the EU means we can't be in the single market and the currency. And he said that.
You can leave the EU, go into the EEA. You're not then fully part of the single market, thus complying with the various red lines that are out there. That's not what he means,
though, is it? That's not what he told Labour MPs.
I think there's a really important, nuanced argument. We've got a very short window of opportunity now before we get the meaningful vote in October. We need to have a better public debate about what the options are. I'm like a broken record on this. I've been talking for well over a year about the advantages of the EEA and EFTA. Yeah. It does give you more flexibility, both in terms of, because EFTA is not customs union.
No, but my point is, unless the Labour Party shifts its position, that meaningful vote is clearly going to go the way of what the government proposes.
That's right. There's a huge opportunity for the Labour Party to take this position. I think there are plenty of Conservative MPs who do not wish to see the wrecking of the British economy as we leave the EU. I think there's a strong cross-party parliamentary majority that could change the game in British politics.
This is where Stephen and I differ. He fundamentally believes, and nothing will change his mind, that leaving the EU was a disaster, was a bad move for Britain. I actually think it was a good move.
I accept
and respect
the referendum.
As we go into the 2020, you're disappointed. You're absolutely. I totally understand that. I think the opposite. I think that the 2020s and the 2030s we will have far more opportunities outside the EU.
Do you not think that even if one looks at the trajectory of the government, that we have moved from a gung-ho idea of a hard Brexit and be good for Britain, we are moving back towards a softer Brexit?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think what's happened is that after the initial vote, we've actually got a government which has a mandate to deliver on the vote. And of course,
so
it was pretty obvious that leaving the EU. I mean, I speak to constituents, and they were saying, "How long is this going to take?" And I said, "This is before the vote, 2 to 4 years." And they accepted that. They accepted the fact that we were in the EU for 46 years, and given that it's a divorce, it will take. Sure. We're not going to be able to do that immediately.
Can I ask you a hypothetical? If Stephen Kinnock were to prevail and the deal were to be to stay in the European Economic Area, would you vote for that or against that?
I have to look at what the terms of the deal are, because as he said, there's not going to be an off-the-shelf deal. It'll be a bespoke deal. There'll be details in that deal, which we'll have to look at the time.
So you could go either way?
Well, you can't tell me, you can't ask me in 6 months ahead of what's going to happen, how I'm going to vote. I don't know what the details will be.
I think we just need to start framing the argument now. We need a clear position from the Labour Party that we need a Brexit based on EEA, EFTA. A Canada deal is just not good enough, because a Canada-based deal doesn't cover services. 80% of the British economy is in services.
Do you think the Labour Party is going to change its position?
I really hope so. I will be doing my damnedest to make that argument to our front bench and to our leadership, and I really hope that when we come, that meaningful vote in October will be the most important vote in Parliament in living memory, arguably, and I think we've got to have the right position there, because the future of our country and future generations depends on it.
I'm not even sure we're guaranteed a meaningful vote in October, but anyway, we will have to leave it there. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This is All Out Politics. Coming up next.
The ability to go day after day will be something brand new for you, I think.
Going to